What if I told you there's a country with no military, no army, no navy, no air force, and yet it's not in chaos? In fact, it's thriving. While most countries race to build bigger armies and stockpile weapons, this country took a different route, and instead of fear, it found freedom. Instead of war, it found well-being, and instead of generals, it trained teachers. It's a place where the national defense budget is practically zero, and the national happiness score is near the top of the world. But how is this possible? In a world filled with rising tensions, invasions, and global instability, how can a country survive with no military at all? Is it a utopian fantasy, a loophole, or a fluke? Stick around, because by the end of this story, you might start to wonder, why does the rest of the world keep choosing war when peace seems to work so much better? Every year, nations spend trillions of dollars preparing for war. In 2023, global military spending surpassed $2.2 trillion, the highest ever recorded. Countries justified this spending in the name of national security, peacekeeping, strategic deterrence, and global dominance. The US spends over $800 billion a year. China, over $300 billion. Russia, India, the UK, Saudi Arabia, they all pour fortunes into tanks, submarines, jets, missiles, satellites, and soldiers. Some of this might make sense in the context of current threats. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China's growing presence in the South China Sea, conflicts in Gaza, Syria, Yemen, and Sudan. The world is tense and the future uncertain. But there's one tiny country that completely rejected this model, a country that said, "We're not going to play this game at all," and instead it chose something else. Tucked between Nicaragua and Panama, you'll find one of the most unique nations on Earth. Covered in lush rainforests, volcanoes, and coastlines on both the Pacific and Caribbean. This small Central American nation is famous for its wildlife, its environmental leadership, and its radical political decision. It abolished its military, completely. Not downsized, not privatized, gone. It didn't happen by accident. The year was 1948, and the country had just emerged from a brutal civil war, the worst in its history. The conflict began over a contested election. Violence broke out between government forces and a rebel army led by a man named José Figueres Ferrer. Over 2,000 people were killed in just 44 days. When the fighting ended, Figueres emerged victorious. And instead of consolidating power or setting up a dictatorship, he did something no one expected. He disbanded the military. He said, "The army is a thing of the past. This country needs teachers, not soldiers." The Constitution was rewritten. Article 12 now states, "The army as a permanent institution is abolished." Welcome to Costa Rica, a country without a military since 1948, a peaceful, democratic nation with one of the highest literacy rates in Latin America, a country where schools outnumber barracks and birds outnumber bullets, and instead of military parades, Costa Rica celebrates environmental conservation, universal health care, social equity, and national well-being. Costa Rica isn't perfect, but it's proof that a nation doesn't need a military to be safe, stable, and successful. So what happens when a country stops pouring billions into bombs, barracks, and battleships? In Costa Rica's case, you build a nation with a different kind of strength. Let's start with education. After abolishing the military in 1948, Costa Rica reallocated a significant portion of its former defense budget toward public education. Today, about 7% of Costa Rica's GDP is invested in education, one of the highest rates in the world. What does that mean in real terms? Free and mandatory education for all children from elementary through high school. Public universities, such as the University of Costa Rica, offer low-cost or even tuition-free education for many students. Investments in teacher training, modern digital classrooms, and rural school infrastructure ensure learning reaches every corner of the country, from urban San Jose to remote mountain villages. The payoff? Costa Rica has a literacy rate of over 97%. It's consistently ranked among the top in Latin America for educational outcomes and accessibility. And more importantly, it has a generation of citizens equipped with critical thinking, civic awareness, and a sense of national responsibility. Now let's talk healthcare. Costa Rica used its peacetime dividend to create a universal healthcare system known as the Caja Costarricense de Seguro Social, or simply La Caja, Funded through taxes and employer/employee contributions, the system covers nearly 90% of the population. What does universal care look like here? Free or low-cost medical services in both urban and rural areas, a vast network of public hospitals and clinics, access to prenatal care, pediatric services, vaccinations, mental health support, dental care, and even specialized surgeries. The result? Costa Ricans live longer, about 80 years on average, surpassing many countries with far greater military might and wealth. The country has even become a medical tourism hub, attracting people from the US and Canada seeking affordable, high-quality care. And all this was possible, in part because Costa Rica chose doctors over destroyers. Peace brought stability, and that stability allowed Costa Rica to build. The government directed military-era funds into roads, clean water systems, power grids, and telecommunications. Rural electrification programs reached isolated areas that had long been left behind. National internet connectivity campaigns helped bridge the digital divide. The country boasts one of the highest mobile and internet penetration rates in Latin America. Beyond infrastructure, Costa Rica invested in social welfare, creating programs that support the elderly, protect children, and uplift marginalized communities. Initiatives include subsidized housing for low-income families, monthly cash transfers for single mothers and the disabled, free school lunches to combat child hunger, job training programs aimed at reducing unemployment and informal labor. These safety nets haven't eliminated poverty, but they've significantly reduced extreme poverty and fostered greater social mobility and inclusion than in many neighboring nations. Then there's Costa Rica's legendary environmental commitment. With no military to fund, Costa Rica put its money into natural security, protecting forests, rivers, coastlines, and biodiversity. It's one of the only countries to reverse deforestation through government-backed reforestation programs and protected land initiatives. Over 25% of Costa Rica's territory is protected in national parks and reserves. The country is home to 5% of the world's biodiversity, despite occupying just 0.03% of the Earth's surface. And when it comes to energy, nearly 99% of Costa Rica's electricity comes from renewable sources, including hydroelectric, wind, geothermal, and solar. While others spend on oil, tanks, and aircraft carriers, Costa Rica spends on river dams, wind farms, and forest restoration. It even aims to become one of the first carbon-neutral countries in the world. It's easy to talk about national values, but where a country puts its money is where you'll find its real priorities. In Costa Rica's case, the message is clear. Education instead of escalation, health instead of harm, stability instead of supremacy, nature instead of nukes. It has become a global model for human development, showing that prosperity doesn't have to come with militarism. Of course, Costa Rica still faces challenges. Underfunded schools in rural areas, long waits in the healthcare system, rising inequality in tourism-heavy zones. But the foundation, peace, gives the country room to improve without fear of collapse. Because when your greatest weapon is the educated mind, the healthy body, and the vibrant forest, you're building a society for the long game. Now let's be real. No military doesn't mean no security. Costa Rica has a strong civilian police force, border patrol, and emergency response units. These organizations handle crime prevention, disaster response, and internal security. It also cooperates with international allies for drug enforcement and emergency aid. And how about national defense? Here's the thing. Costa Rica relies on diplomacy and international treaties. It's a member of the United Nations and the Organization of American States. It maintains peaceful relations with its neighbors and focuses on non-interventionism. And so far, it's working. Costa Rica has not been invaded or attacked in the 76 years since it disbanded its army. Costa Rica's radical peace model hasn't gone unnoticed. It has. Won a UN Peace Prize. Hosted the University for Peace, an academic institution dedicated to global conflict resolution. Been ranked as one of the most eco-friendly nations in the world. Attracted millions of tourists each year who come not for history of war, but for the promise of peace and nature. The country's slogan, Pura Vida, meaning pure life, isn't just branding. It's a worldview, a cultural commitment to simplicity, gratitude, and joy. But let's ask the tough question. Could every country do what Costa Rica did? Probably not. Costa Rica is small, just over 5 million people. It doesn't border any aggressive superpowers, It doesn't have massive natural resources that might provoke invasions, but that doesn't make its model irrelevant. If anything, it shows that peace is possible when a country chooses it deliberately. In regions plagued by war, Costa Rica is a case study in peacebuilding, and its success challenges the assumption that strong military equals strong country. Maybe, just maybe, strength lies elsewhere. So has Costa Rica's no military policy created a utopia? Not exactly. While the story is remarkable, and in many ways inspiring, no nation is without its shadows. Costa Rica's peaceful model brings with it some unique vulnerabilities and ongoing criticisms that deserve attention. One of the most pressing challenges? Rising crime. While Costa Rica doesn't have a military, it does have a national police force and several specialized units, including border patrol, drug enforcement, and anti-terrorism teams. But they're not always enough. In recent years, Costa Rica has seen a sharp increase in organized crime, much of it tied to drug trafficking routes from South America to North America. In 2023, the country recorded its highest ever number of homicides, many of them linked to gang violence and cartel activity. Critics argue that without military-level resources, training, or intelligence capabilities, Costa Rica is vulnerable to the spread of transnational criminal organizations. The country's leaders have even acknowledged the crisis. President Rodrigo Chavez described it as Costa Rica losing control of certain areas. And while Costa Rica's police are well-trained, they often face underfunding, limited weaponry, and poor infrastructure in comparison to criminal networks that are heavily armed and well-funded. Another key criticism? Costa Rica's peace depends, at least partially, on others having militaries. The country has informal security assurances from allies like the United States, which has supported Costa Rica with training, equipment, and joint anti-narcotics operations. In the event of a full-scale military threat from a foreign nation, Costa Rica would have to rely on diplomatic channels or external powers to intervene. While Costa Rica is respected on the world stage, it also exists in a geopolitical reality where peace is not guaranteed. Some argue that Costa Rica has enjoyed free rider benefits from U.S. military presence in the region, and that its demilitarized model might not work in more volatile neighborhoods of the world. Though the country is peaceful, its neighbors have not always been. In 2010, a border dispute with Nicaragua escalated when Nicaraguan troops entered an area claimed by Costa Rica, allegedly damaging protected wetlands. Costa Rica brought the case to the International Court of Justice and won, but it had no military means to directly enforce its sovereignty in the moment. Events like this raise difficult questions. What happens when peaceful intentions meet aggressive neighbors? What's the backup plan when diplomacy fails? Ironically, despite redirecting funds to education and healthcare, those systems still face serious challenges. In rural areas, schools often lack teachers, textbooks, or even reliable electricity. The healthcare system, while universal, is overburdened. Patients often wait months for specialist care or surgeries. Public hospitals struggle with resource shortages, and there's rising pressure to partially privatize aspects of the system. Critics argue that while Costa Rica has done well without a military, the savings haven't always been perfectly managed. Corruption, bureaucracy, and mismanagement in some sectors have led to budget leaks and inefficiencies, weakening the country's soft power tools. Costa Rica's economy thrives on ecotourism, agriculture, and clean tech, but there's a growing gap between urban, affluent areas and poorer rural zones. Regions heavily reliant on tourism suffered during COVID-19 and have struggled to bounce back. Indigenous communities and agricultural laborers still face low wages, limited access to services, and few opportunities for upward mobility. Housing costs in popular expat zones like Guanacaste and the Central Valley have skyrocketed, pushing locals out of their own communities. In short, peace doesn't guarantee prosperity for all. There's also a new kind of warfare, one that doesn't involve tanks or soldiers: cyber warfare. Costa Rica has already experienced this firsthand. In 2022, a ransomware group targeted key government systems, including the Ministry of Finance, paralyzing public services and threatening to leak sensitive data. The country had no military cyber defense unit and struggled to respond quickly or decisively. In a world where attacks come in ones and zeros, not bullets, a lack of military infrastructure can leave critical national systems exposed. Public opinion about the no military policy remains largely positive, but not universally so. In times of crisis, some Costa Ricans question whether the country should reintroduce a small defense force. Politicians from conservative sectors occasionally float the idea, though it remains politically unpopular. There's also concern that underinvestment in police forces might lead to growing instability, pushing the public toward more hardline policies in the future. Costa Rica's commitment to peace is strong, but its social contract requires constant renewal. In a world that glorifies dominance, Costa Rica reminds us that there's another kind of power: the power to heal, not harm; the power to teach, not threaten; the power to grow, not destroy; the power of prioritizing people over militarism. And maybe that's the lesson we need right now. Because while we keep fighting wars abroad, some nations are winning peace at home.